Verified incident logs. Authentic footage. Pure accountability. Welcome to Bodycam Incident Reports.
This is counterfeit. It smells like marijuana.
Are you
searching your bag?
I do not consent to any searches of my personal property.
Turn around. Hands behind your head.
Am I being detained?
Oak Shore's luxury apartment complex, main pool deck. Saturday, 2 p.m. Heat radiating off the concrete pushed past 115 degrees. Brandon Reed, a 28-year-old resident of Unit 402, possessed zero tactical advantages. He had just pulled himself from the pool, water dripping down his chest onto the baking aggregate beneath his bare feet. Wearing only wet navy blue swim trunks, he had no shirt, no shoes, and no pockets capable of concealing a weapon. His physical vulnerability was absolute. He walked directly to the resident cabana bar to escape the sun. Before we see how a simple bottle of water turns into a constitutional nightmare, drop a like, hit subscribe, and let me know down in the comments. What city are you watching this from? Jake, a college student working the weekend shift, wiped down the quartz countertop. Brandon unsealed a waterproof silicone pouch tucked into the waistband of his trunks. He pulled out his smartphone and a single folded piece of United States currency. It was a crisp, structurally flawless $100 bill, dispensed by a Chase ATM just 20 minutes prior. "A bottle of still water and a cup of ice, Jake," Brandon said, his voice level. He placed the dry $100 bill flat onto the damp quartz surface of the bar. Jake nodded, tapping the digital point-of-sale touchscreen. The heavy metal cash drawer beneath the counter kicked open with a sharp, mechanical clack. Jake reached his right hand forward to collect the money. His fingers never touched it. Stepping out from the blind spot directly behind the canvas awning was Officer David Walker. Walker was an active-duty municipal patrol officer working an off-duty security detail, yet he operated with the full weight and authority of the state. The contrast between the two men occupying the exact same space was staggering. While Brandon stood barefoot in wet nylon, Walker was encased in a dark tactical uniform and a heavy Kevlar ballistic vest. A loaded Glock 17 sat holstered on his hip. He was a walking fortress in the heavy afternoon humidity. Walker bypassed all standard investigative protocols. He didn't announce his presence. He didn't issue a command. He just moved. His right arm shot out. A hand sheathed in a black hard-knuckle tactical glove slammed down flat onto the wet quartz counter. The kinetic impact vibrated the plastic cups stacked near the register. The black synthetic leather pinned the $100 bill to the stone exactly half a second before Jake's fingers could reach it. Time seemed to fracture. Jake froze mid-reach. The blood drained from the bartender's face as his eyes darted from the heavy black glove, crushing the money up to the officer's mirrored sunglasses. The ambient bass from the poolside speakers seemed to instantly fade beneath the sharp, static hiss of the Motorola radio mounted on Walker's shoulder strap. Brandon's resting heart rate spiked, his pupils dilating from the sudden rush of adrenaline, but he didn't flinch. He slowly turned his head. His bare feet shifted slightly on the wet concrete, squaring his unprotected chest to face the armored officer. Walker completely ignored the bartender. His head was tilted down, his hidden gaze locked entirely on Brandon. Without breaking that invisible stare, Walker slowly dragged his gloved hand backward across the wet quartz. He pulled the $100 bill out of the civilian space and into his own possession. The green paper left a faint, watery streak across the bar. In that single aggressive motion, an invisible legal threshold was crossed. This was no longer a commercial transaction. It was a physical seizure of private property. Walker picked the bill up off the counter, holding it pinched between his thumb and forefinger. He stared at the face of Benjamin Franklin. The trap was set. Now, the officer just had to manufacture the legal justification to spring it. Walker did not immediately put the money in his pocket. He held the $100 bill up, pinching it between the thick synthetic leather of his tactical gloves. He let the harsh, blinding afternoon sun backlight the paper, illuminating the woven security thread embedded in the cotton blend. It was a highly theatrical assessment. He aggressively rubbed his heavy thumb over the textured numerical denomination in the corner, mimicking the protocol of a Secret Service agent examining a known forgery. "Don't ring this up," Walker commanded, his gaze shifting to Jake for a fraction of a second. His voice was a low, pressurized baritone that cut through the ambient noise of the pool deck. "It's counterfeit." Brandon didn't raise his voice. He didn't step forward or make any sudden movements that could be interpreted as hostile. He kept his bare hands at his sides, visible and open against his wet swim trunks. "Officer, I withdrew that exact bill from the Chase ATM directly outside the main gate 20 minutes ago," Brandon stated clearly, ensuring the bartender heard the timeline. "It's legal tender. Hand me my money back." Walker ignored the explanation entirely. A suspect's verbal defense holds zero weight against an officer's on-the-spot suspicion. The counterfeit claim was his primary weapon. It gave him the immediate legal right to seize the property. But Walker didn't just want the $100. He wanted to tear through Brandon's belongings. To do that, he needed an escalation. He needed to manufacture probable cause for a full search. Walker brought the crisp green paper millimeters from his nose. He inhaled sharply through his nostrils. "And it smells like marijuana," Walker added, looking down at Brandon's unprotected, dripping chest. There it was, the secondary strike. Two entirely subjective, unprovable claims made in under 10 seconds. Walker didn't need a chemical test or a K9 unit on the pool deck. His personal training and experience were legally sufficient to establish suspicion. Walker didn't wait for Brandon to offer another defense. He folded the $100 bill sharply in half. He reached up to the heavy Kevlar ballistic carrier, strapped tightly across his torso. He grabbed the thick Velcro flap of his breast pocket and ripped it open. Reep, snap. The sharp, violent sound of the Velcro tearing apart and sealing back together was the physical sound of the legal trap locking shut. The money was gone, swallowed into the dark navy uniform as official evidence. By simply declaring the bill fake and claiming an invisible odor, Walker had successfully transformed a resident buying a bottle of water into an active criminal suspect, completely stripping him of his presumption of innocence. Walker's mirrored sunglasses snapped away from Brandon's face. The officer's head tilted, his hidden gaze sweeping past the paralyzed bartender and locking onto a white plastic sun lounger 10 feet away. Resting on the white slats was a black canvas duffel bag, a room key attached to a blue silicone coil, and a tube of sunscreen sat on top of it. The officer's posture shifted. The heavy Kevlar vest creaked slightly as his broad shoulders angled toward the new target with predatory focus. "Is that your bag?" Walker demanded. It wasn't an inquiry. It was the next mechanical step in his procedural escalation. "Yes," Brandon replied. "Step aside," Walker commanded. The thick rubber soles of his boots scraped against the wet aggregate concrete as he closed the distance by a half step. "I am conducting a search of that bag for additional counterfeit currency and illegal narcotics." Brandon didn't step aside. Instead, he took a calculated half step backward, widening his barefoot stance on the slippery sun-baked tile to maintain his physical balance. He slowly raised both of his hands to chest level. His palms were open, facing the officer. It was a posture of absolute, undeniable physical compliance, paired instantly with a total legal blockade. "Officer," Brandon stated, his voice clipped, projected clearly enough for Jake and the surrounding bystanders to hear, "I do not consent to any searches of my personal property." The pool deck went dead silent. The muffled bass of the Bluetooth speaker and the low hum of the commercial filtration pumps seemed to evaporate into the heavy, humid air. Under the law, a citizen's verbal refusal to consent to a warrantless search is a fundamental shield, not an admission of guilt. But standing in the sweltering heat of the Oak Shores pool deck, Walker didn't hear a citizen exercising a civil right. He heard a half-naked, dripping man publicly challenging his absolute authority. For 3 agonizing seconds, neither man breathed. It was a block of solid, heavy silence. The tension stretched until it was razor thin. Then, the muscles in Walker's jaw flexed tightly beneath his skin. "Mistake," Walker breathed. His right hand dropped rapidly to his waist, the black tactical leather of his glove coming to rest heavily over the textured polymer grip of his holstered sidearm. Walker's hand remained resting heavily on the textured grip of his sidearm. He didn't draw the weapon, but the implication was absolute. "Turn around," Walker barked, the command echoing sharply off the cabana walls. "Put your hands behind your head." Brandon did not lower his open palms. He did not clench his fists. Moving with deliberate slowness, he pivoted his bare feet on the slippery tile. He turned his unprotected back to the armored officer and slowly interlaced his fingers behind his head. "Am I being detained, officer?" Brandon asked over his shoulder, his voice tight but controlled. "What specific crime am I suspected of commit?" He never finished the sentence. Walker didn't answer. He closed the gap in a single, explosive stride. 240 pounds of Kevlar, duty gear, and muscle crashed into bare, wet skin. Walker's left hand shot forward, gripping Brandon's interlaced fingers and violently wrenching his arms down and backward. Simultaneously, Walker's heavy leather boot hooked directly behind Brandon's right ankle, a textbook tactical sweep. Brandon's wet feet flew out from under him. He went down hard, unable to catch himself with his trapped hands. His bare chest and face slammed violently into the sun-baked concrete. The scorching stone instantly seared his wet skin, but the sheer blunt force of the drop eclipsed the burn, driving the oxygen from his lungs in a sharp, ragged gasp. Ice and water from his dropped drink splashed across the tile, mixing with a thin line of blood welling from a scrape on his cheekbone. Before Brandon's brain could even process the physical trauma, Walker dropped his entire armored weight onto him. The officer's knee drove like a piston directly into the center of Brandon's bare spine, pinning him flat against the deck. Click-clack, zip. The cold, rigid steel of the handcuffs bit aggressively into Brandon's bare wrists, ratcheting tight enough to pinch the radial nerves. Walker leaned his upper body down, crushing his chest flush against Brandon's upper back. The lens of his chest-mounted Axon body, 3 camera, buried directly into Brandon's wet shoulder, plunging the video feed into total, suffocating darkness. The microphone muffled instantly against wet skin. "Stop resisting!" Walker yelled, his voice booming across the pool deck. "Oh my God! What are you doing?" A woman's voice shrieked from the nearby sunbeds, scrambling backward. Jake, the bartender, stood absolutely frozen behind the quartz counter, a dripping towel clutched white-knuckled in his hands. Brandon remained pinned against the aggregate concrete. The 115-degree heat transferred instantly into his wet, unprotected skin, but the ratcheted steel of the handcuffs commanded his immediate nervous system. Walker stood up, his heavy boots left wet, dark prints on the sun-baked tile, as he stepped over Brandon's legs and walked toward the white plastic sun lounger. He grabbed the black canvas duffel bag by its nylon straps. He didn't meticulously search the pockets. He ripped the main zipper open, grabbed the bottom of the bag, and violently upended it over the lounger. A rolled-up white beach towel tumbled out. A blue tube of sports sunscreen clattered against the plastic slats. A tangled white iPhone charging cable. A stick of deodorant. Nothing else. No stacks of forged $100 bills. No plastic baggies. The probable cause was an empty mirage on a white plastic chair. Walker stared at the mundane pile of poolside items. The heavy, frantic adrenaline of the takedown began to recede, instantly replaced by cold, tactical calculus. He had just executed a violent physical sweep on a half-naked man in a public space with multiple civilian witnesses. Without contraband to justify the escalation, The violence was completely exposed. Walker's jaw set. He turned away from the lounger and walked back to where Brandon was lying in a puddle of melting ice and his own blood. Walker bent down, grabbed Brandon tight by the right bicep, his thick tactical gloves digging into the bare muscle, and hauled the barefoot man to his feet with a single brutal jerk. "You're under arrest," Walker stated, his voice flat, devoid of its earlier heat. Brandon stood unsteadily, his bare toes gripping the wet tile. Blood dripped slowly from the scrape on his cheekbone, mixing with the chlorinated water on his chest. "For what?" Brandon asked. "Disorderly conduct," Walker replied, already shoving Brandon forward toward the complex exit. "And resisting arrest." The classic self-fulfilling procedural loop. The arrest itself was the only crime. The environment of the municipal precinct squad room was a violent sensory shock after the suffocating heat of the Oak Shores pool deck. The heavy 65-degree air conditioning blasted endlessly from the ceiling vents, rapidly cooling the sweat trapped beneath Walker's Kevlar vest. The glaring natural sunlight was replaced by the sterile, flickering hum of overhead fluorescent tubes. Walker sat alone at a scratched gunmetal gray desk in the far corner of the bullpen. The adrenaline of the physical altercation had completely faded, leaving behind the cold, mechanical reality of police paperwork. Before touching the keyboard, he reached under the thick Velcro flap of his chest pocket. He withdrew the folded $100 bill. It was completely dry now. He pulled a heavy-duty clear plastic evidence bag from the wire tray on his desk, dropped the crisp green paper inside, and peeled the backing off the red, tamper-evident seal. He smoothed the adhesive down forcefully, permanently trapping the currency inside. With a black Sharpie, he filled out the chain of custody label. Under offense/charge, he wrote in sharp block letters, "Suspected forgery/narcotics investigation." He tossed the sealed bag into the outgoing evidence basket. The money was officially logged into the system. The pretext for the stop was now physically secured. Now he had to legally erase the reality of the takedown. Walker pulled the heavy plastic keyboard toward him and opened a blank digital incident and arrest report on the department's records management system. He stared at the blinking cursor on the bright white monitor. He was a veteran officer. He knew exactly how the judicial machinery operated. He didn't write a factual, chronological recollection of the pool deck. A factual recollection of slamming a compliant, half-naked man onto the concrete for exercising his Fourth Amendment rights would cost him his badge, his pension, and invite a massive federal civil rights lawsuit. Instead, Walker began to construct an alternate, legally bulletproof reality. He was writing a script explicitly engineered for a judge's eyes, carefully designed to trigger the absolute protections of qualified immunity. He needed the magic words, the specific court-approved tactical buzzwords that retroactively justified the scrape and the blood on Brandon Reed's cheekbone. His thick fingers tapped steadily across the keys, the clacking sound echoing in the quiet room. Upon initiating a lawful investigatory detention regarding the suspected passing of counterfeit currency, the suspect, B. Reed, became immediately verbally hostile and visibly agitated. Despite multiple lawful commands to remain compliant and keep his hands visible, the suspect ignored this officer, bladed his body toward me, and clenched both hands into fists in a recognized pre-assaultive posture. Recognizing the immediate, articulable threat to officer safety and the high probability of the suspect attempting to flee or destroy narcotics evidence, I utilized a standard tactical leg sweep to gain compliance and effect the arrest. The suspect continued to actively resist mechanical restraints once on the ground. Walker stopped typing. He leaned back in his chair and read over the paragraph. It was a masterpiece of procedural fiction. It hit every necessary legal threshold: reasonable suspicion, ignored lawful commands, perceived physical threat, and proportional use of force. He moved his mouse to the bottom of the screen. He checked the digital box, electronically signing the document under penalty of perjury. He clicked Submit. The progress bar flashed across the screen as the digital file uploaded to the municipal server. The lie was no longer just a physical assault on a wet concrete deck. It was now a sworn, official government document. Michael Green did not argue with police officers. He dismantled them with paper. Sitting behind the heavy mahogany desk of his downtown law firm, Green reviewed the digital incident and arrest report filed by Officer David Walker. He read the tactical buzzwords: pre-assaultive posture, bladed body, hostile. He looked at the color booking photo of his client, Brandon Reed, noting the dark purple contusion and the jagged sealed laceration high on his right cheekbone. Green ignored the claim about the smell of marijuana. Scent is vapor. It cannot be proven or disproven in a courtroom. Instead, the defense attorney zeroed in on the absolute physical catalyst of the entire encounter: the $100 bill. Walker's entire legal justification for seizing the money and initiating the detention rested on his sworn assertion that his training and experience identified the currency as counterfeit. If the bill was real, the initial seizure was a Fourth Amendment violation. If the seizure was illegal, the subsequent search was illegal under the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine. Green bypassed the local police precinct entirely. He went straight to the federal financial grid. He drafted and filed a subpoena duces tecum, serving it directly to the Legal Compliance Division of J.P. Morgan Chase. He didn't ask for Brandon's bank statement. He demanded the internal, encrypted machine logs for the specific ATM located outside the Oak Shores complex for the exact minute of 1:40 p.m. on that Saturday. 3 days later, the secure file arrived. Modern high-capacity ATMs do not just dispense paper. To combat advanced financial fraud, the internal optical scanners log the exact Federal Reserve serial number of every high-denomination bill that passes through the rollers, tying it to the user's encrypted biometric and account data. It is a closed-loop federal-level data chain that is mathematically impossible to forge. Green opened the police evidence log on his left monitor. Officer Walker had meticulously recorded the serial number of the confiscated counterfeit bill, MB38291047A. Green opened the Chase ATM diagnostic log on his right monitor. He scrolled down to the exact timestamp of Brandon's withdrawal. There it was, stamped in cold, irrefutable digital ink. Dispense, $100 US. Routing, Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Serial number, MB38291047A. It was a perfect cryptographic match. The bank log proved the bill was a verified, authentic United States Treasury note. Officer Walker hadn't intercepted a forgery. He had executed a violent armed robbery of a citizen's legal tender under the color of law. The foundational pillar of Walker's probable cause didn't just crack. It instantly and completely vaporized. Green printed the chase log, the heavy laser printer humming in the quiet office. He had the weapon he needed. Now, he just needed to trap the officer under oath. The Chase Bank logs proved the initial seizure was an illegal act, but financial data doesn't capture concrete. To dismantle Officer Walker's sworn narrative of a pre-assaultive posture, attorney Michael Green needed eyes on the pool deck. He knew better than to rely on the Axon Body 3 footage. When the municipal prosecutor's office turned over the file, it was predictably useless. At the exact second the tension peaked, the camera violently jerked downward into total darkness. The audio immediately muffled against wet skin. The critical 3-second window of the takedown was entirely blind. Green hired a private investigator to canvass the Oak Shores residence. Within 48 hours, the investigator located a woman who had been sitting 3 sunbeds away from the Cabana bar. She had recorded the encounter on her smartphone. Fearing police retaliation, she transferred the raw MP4 file under the condition of strict anonymity. Green sat at his mahogany desk and opened the file. The vertical 4K video, shot from behind a canvas umbrella, captured the exact profile angle Walker's body cam had missed. Green watched the sequence unfold, listening to Brandon Reed clearly state his refusal to consent to a search. Green hit the spacebar, freezing the video a fraction of a second before the physical strike. The frozen frame was an act of digital perjury against Walker's official report. Brandon Reed was not blading his body. His hands were not clenched into fists. His bare fingers were visibly interlaced behind his head in an undeniable posture of absolute physical compliance. In the very next frame, Walker closed the gap, violently wrenching Brandon's bound arms backward and executing the leg sweep. Green watched the unprotected chest slam into the 115-degree aggregate tile. Green minimized the media player. He didn't call the municipal prosecutor to negotiate a plea deal. He didn't draft a complaint to the precinct's internal affairs division. He opened his firm's legal database, pulled a blank template, and began typing the formal notice compelling Officer David Walker to appear for a sworn civil deposition. The heavy glass door of the law firm's conference room clicked shut, sealing out the ambient noise of the office. The only sound remaining was the rapid muted clatter of the court reporter's stenotype machine. Officer David Walker sat across the wide mahogany table from Michael Green. Stripped of his dark tactical uniform, his Kevlar vest, and his duty belt, Walker wore a stiff, poorly fitted gray suit. His union-appointed attorney sat to his right, leaning back with a posture of relaxed boredom. Civil depositions stemming from resisting arrest charges were usually routine fishing expeditions. Officer Walker, Green began, his voice entirely flat. You authored and electronically signed the incident report detailing the arrest of Brandon Reed. Is that correct? Yes, Walker replied confidently. And you signed this document under penalty of perjury? I did. Let's review your sworn narrative, Green said, looking down at a printed copy of the report. You state that you seized a $100 bill from Mr. Reed because your training and experience identified it as counterfeit. Correct. The paper felt wrong. You further state that upon initiating a lawful detention, Mr. Reed ignored commands, bladed his body toward you, and clenched both hands into fists, assuming a recognized pre-assaultive posture. That is correct, Walker said, leaning forward slightly, settling into his practiced courtroom cadence. He was preparing to strike. I reacted to the immediate threat to officer safety. Green didn't blink. He reached into his leather briefcase, extracted a single piece of paper, and slid it face up across the polished wood. Exhibit A, Green stated for the record. Certified diagnostic logs subpoenaed directly from J.P. Morgan Chase. Time-stamped 20 minutes prior to your interaction with my client. Please read the serial number of the dispensed $100 bill. Walker looked down. The union attorney leaned in, his eyes scanning the document. MB 38291047A, Walker read. His voice lost a fraction of its baseline volume. That is a perfect alphanumeric match to the bill you entered into evidence as a suspected forgery, Green said. Walker shifted in his leather chair. Counterfeits can occasionally slip into ATMs. Green didn't let him finish the pivot. He reached out and turned a sleek silver laptop toward the center of the table, angling the screen so both the officer and his attorney had an unobstructed view. Green hit the spacebar. The vertical 4K video played. The ambient audio of the pool filtration pumps filled the quiet, air-conditioned room. Brandon Reed's voice played out of the laptop speakers, crystal clear. I do not consent to any searches of my personal property. Walker's face went entirely rigid. Green hit the spacebar again. The video froze exactly half a second before Walker initiated the physical takedown. The high-definition image illuminated the screen. It showed Brandon's wet, bare back turning slowly on the tile. His fingers were visibly, undeniably interlaced behind his head. No bladed stance. No clenched fists. Exhibit B, Green said quietly. He pushed the laptop an inch closer to the officer. Officer Walker, please point to the clenched fist you swore you saw before you drove Mr. Reed face first into the concrete. The clatter of the stenotype machine stopped. The silence in the room was absolute. The union attorney immediately reached out and clamped his hand over Walker's microphone. He leaned into his client's ear, whispering aggressively for 10 seconds. Walker stared fixedly at the frozen image of his own lie on the monitor. Walker sat back up. He looked at Green, then slowly turned his head to the court reporter. On the advice of counsel, Walker said, his voice completely hollow, I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The municipal government did not let the civil rights lawsuit reach a jury. 7 days after the deposition, the city's risk management department authorized a $2.4 million wire transfer to Michael Green's trust account. Officer David Walker was stripped of his qualified immunity. He was terminated from the department, and the district attorney formally submitted his name to the Brady List, a permanent public registry of law enforcement officers proven to have committed perjury. His career under the color of law was permanently extinguished. Oak Shores Luxury Apartment Complex, main pool deck, Saturday, 2 p.m. The 115-degree heat radiated off the concrete. Brandon Reed, barefoot and wearing his navy blue swim trunks, walked across the sun-baked tile toward the cabana bar. A faint, perfectly healed scar sat high on his right cheekbone. Jake was working the weekend shift. He didn't wait for an order. He pulled a bottle of still water from the cooler, filled a plastic cup with ice, and placed them on the damp quartz countertop. Brandon didn't reach into the mesh lining of his wet trunks. He didn't pull out a waterproof silicone pouch, and he didn't unfold a crisp Federal Reserve note. He simply extended his left arm over the counter. He hovered his matte black smartwatch an inch above the digital point-of-sale terminal. Ping. A quiet, encrypted digital transaction. Instantaneous. Invisible. There was no physical currency to seize. No paper to inspect. No probable cause left to manufacture. Brandon picked up the cold water, turned his back to the open pool deck, and walked back to his lounger. The takeaway here is brutal but simple. Paper money leaves room for officer intuition, but digital data leaves no room for lies. Brandon didn't win because he fought back physically. He won because he explicitly stated his Fourth Amendment rights on camera and let the federal ATM logs do the fighting for him in court. If you want to see more stories where knowing your rights actually destroys corrupt authority, drop a like and make sure to hit subscribe. And let me know down in the comments, what city are you watching from? And have you ever had to look a cop in the eye and explicitly deny consent to a search?
The incident review concludes here. To support continued transparency, kindly like and subscribe. We appreciate you watching Bodycam Incident Reports.